Chapter 7. Johann Franck, 1618 to 1677. Those who love the Father, though the storms may gather, still have peace within. Yea, whatever I here must bear, thou art still my purest pleasure, Jesus, priceless treasure. Translated by Catherine Winkworth, 1863. I just know it's the same guy, hissed Annie in Mr. Pipes' ear, her fingers gripping his sleeve. Mr. Pipes looked at Annie's wide eyes and terrified face and checked himself before dismissing her fears with a light jest. Clearly she believed that someone was following them. He had just been thinking that Monday morning as they boarded the boat for an excursion north on the Rhine how pleasant it was to have Annie's fears of someone following them behind her. He looked around the deck of the river boat. It looked like an ordinary mixture of foreign and German tourists, but he saw no one who looked at all like the young man they had seen earlier. "I beg your pardon. To whom are you referring, my dear?" asked Mr. Pipes patiently. "I can't see anyone who looks like a spy." He felt Annie's fingers grip his arm more tightly, and her eyes begged him to believe her. "2 rows back near the German flag, at the stern," she whispered, trying to keep her voice from quivering. "He's reading a newspaper, and of course he doesn't look like a spy. That's just the point. They try not to look like they're spying." "Wait a second," said Drew, overhearing. "So if you're right, Annie, everyone who doesn't look like a spy is one?" He rolled his eyes. "Might be one," said Annie defensively, "and that guy we saw before who used to wear the overcoat and cap is sitting right by the flag. Same guy, I'm sure of it." "But there's nobody around who looks anything like him," said Drew, standing up conspicuously and craning his neck for a better view. Mr. Pipes turned around deliberately. "But, my dear," he said at last, "you can't mean that young man." Yes, reading a newspaper, but wearing a black leather jacket, thick-soled combat boots with shaved head, and all those earrings, and I say that ghastly ring in his nose. How could you possibly recognize him as the same fellow? Furthermore, my dear, one cannot fail to observe that fellow looks like a rather high percentage of Germans we've seen under the age of 30. How can you be so sure that he's the same chap? I'm morally certain there are large segments of society who read newspapers, but who are never drawn into the cloak and dagger life of the common spy." "It's him," said Annie. "He's only shaved his head and dressed like that to try and fool us. He looks pretty embarrassed about it all." "As well he should," said Mr. Pipes. "I'm more convinced than ever," said Annie, "that he is following us." "The plot thickens," said Drew, obviously enjoying himself. "Drew, I think you'd actually like it if he was a spy, or worse," said Annie. "You bet," agreed Drew. "Hey, I'm going to try and get a photograph of him. They did that kind of thing in the Cold War. He's probably already got ours. And the KGB, no doubt, has had us on file for years." He grinned eagerly as he dug his camera out of his knapsack. Turning it over in his hand, he frowned. "I sure wish this was a spy camera. What did they call them? A Minox? Yeah, that's it. German made too, I think." He narrowed his eyes and looked side to side. "Now you just leave this all to me. The name's Willis. Andrew Willis." It was Annie's turn to roll her eyes. "Drew," said Mr. Pipes, smiling indulgently, "you clearly have an overworked imagination. Now, Annie, my dear, we are approaching some of the loveliest scenery on the Rhine. Do try to forget our young friend back there. I'm absolutely certain he's harmless." Annie bit her lip and stroked Lady Catherine's chin. "I'll try," she said, glancing once more back at the man. She broke into a little smile that almost giggled. "He does look awfully ridiculous dressed like that." "About that, we agree," said Mr. Pipes. The hills along the Rhine seemed to level and melt away into a broad populated city. "Ah, yes, the incomparable city of Mainz," said Mr. Pipes. "Do look to our port. The many towers of the Cathedral of St. Mary and St. Martin rise within full view of the river. She is a marvelous example of late Romanesque with hints of Gothic on her newer arches and towers. Here, Annie, look through my opera glasses. They bring every detail so wonderfully close. Look at all those arches," she said, peering through the little binoculars. I don't know what to say. It's all so beautiful." "Can I have a peek?" asked Drew. Drew studied the stonework and scalloped gables, the rows and rows of arches and lofty turrets. "You're right, Mr. Pipes. Those lower round towers look lots older. Churches must have been pretty important to people back in the old days. With the opera glasses, he scanned slowly along the sun-drenched roof lines. I can't imagine how long it took them to build a place like this. Ooh, and how much money it must have cost. Indeed, it does tell us something about the shifting priorities of people then and now, said Mr. Pipes. I wish churches in America looked beautiful like these, said Annie wistfully. Yeah, our fanciest buildings are for sports and government, maybe banks too, said Drew. This place looks even better. Was it an important city in the Reformation? Asked Drew. In a most profound way it was, said Mr. Pipes. Mainz was the home of Johann Gutenberg, the inventor of the first printing press. He revolutionized the printing of books, and his press greatly enhanced the spread of the gospel throughout Europe. How did they make books before Gutenberg? Asked Annie, nuzzling noses with Lady Kitty, settled in her perch on Annie's shoulder. In the Middle Ages, every word of every page of every book monks laboriously copied by hand, my dear, said Mr. Pipes. Oh, there must not have been very many books then, said Annie. And hand-copied ones cost the big bucks, I'll bet, added Drew. Yes, so only the very wealthy own books, said Mr. Pipes. And of course, if books were scarce and expensive, only a very few learned to read them. Gutenberg helped change all that. Now, what book do you suppose he first printed on his new invention? I don't know, said Drew. A cookbook? They all laughed. Gutenberg gave history wonderful testimony to his priorities in 1456, when the first book produced in the Western world by movable type print was the Holy Bible, God's Word, not man's. Later, Luther's German Bible, his books, pamphlets, and hymns were printed in large quantities and at affordable prices. As a result, schools grew and more people learned to read. Yes, I would certainly say, thanks to Johann Gutenberg, that Mainz was an important city, helping spread the gospel during the Reformation. They left behind the broad valley surrounding Mainz, and once again, hills covered with vineyards and terraced with ancient stone retaining walls met the banks of the Rhine. Hoping no one saw him, Drew slowly turned the opera glasses back toward Annie's spy, sitting only yards behind. The spy's face leapt into view as he focused. Wow! He's really got a nose. Wait, he actually does look sort of like. Drew refocused the little binoculars. Maybe Annie was right about this guy. Annie, gazing at the changing scenery, didn't notice Drew's spying, but she couldn't help peering nervously toward the stern. Then it happened. Perhaps the fluttering of the colorful German flag caught the kitten's attention, but in any case, Lady Catherine suddenly sprang from Annie's shoulder onto the shoulder of a large German woman in the row behind. Frightened by the woman shrieking in her flailing arms, Lady Catherine leapt onto the shoulder of the next passenger, and then, with a crouch and spring motion, she landed on the cap of a gentleman in the next row. As the man clawed at his head, Annie realized with horror that her kitten was about to vault onto the stern rail next to the flag. If she missed, Annie realized, Lady Kitty would plunge into the swirling wake of those powerful engines, and most certainly be lost forever. Annie did what any self-respecting girl would do in the same situation. She screamed. With all four paws spread out, Lady Kitty did leap. Annie felt her heart sink. But what was that? Suddenly springing from his seat, the man in the black leather jacket, like a wide receiver, caught Lady Kitty only a hair's width before she would have plunged into the foaming wake. What a catch, said Drew. Annie felt weak in the knees, but mumbled her thanks as her spy handed the spitting and hissing Lady Kitty to her. Mr. Pipes spoke to the man in German, thanking him, and offered apologies to the ruffled passengers before they returned to their seats. That was so close, said Annie when she finally recovered her voice. Oh, but why did it have to be the spy who rescued you, you naughty kitty? Mr. Pipes, wearing a puzzled expression on his face, pulled out his map and thumbed through his little notebook. What are you looking for? Asked Drew. Mr. Pipes glanced back at the leather-clad, earringed man before answering. Annie looked at the frown on Mr. Pipes' face. What's wrong, Mr. Pipes? Oh, I'm sure it's nothing. Really, I am. He paused. It's just that he spoke to me in German. But he is not German. I know that from his accent. It's nothing. Surely not. Drew looked at Annie and raised his eyebrows. With a Mr. Pipes resumed studying his notebook and mapped. Ah, here it is. Just ahead is the village, home of a most extraordinary pipe organ builder. Mind you,
Germany is filled with organ builders, but I've had the privilege of playing one of Herr Fritz's organs, and, I dare say, he is the very best. What would you say to—" he glanced quickly over his shoulder, "to a detour, an unplanned stopover at his workshop? We could hail a taxi at the next stop and be there in a few minutes' time. It will be most interesting, I'm sure." "That sounds great," said Drew. Annie looked over her shoulder. "Oh, let's go. But can we do it without—" she gestured with her head, rolling her eyes toward the stern of the boat, "without you-know-who following?" "That, my dear," said Mr. Pipes, unsmiling, "is precisely my desire." At the next stop, Mr. Pipes, looking out of the corner of his eye, said, "Make no move until the very last minute. That's it. Look casual and unhurried." "What if we miss getting off?" hissed Annie, behind a casual-looking smile. "The last passenger just stepped off." "Patience, my dears," said Mr. Pipes. "Grip your knapsacks. Do you have Lady Kitty well in hand? Stay seated. Stay. He glanced casually back at the spy. He remained seated. This may very well work. The deck hand began pulling the plank aside. "Now," said Mr. Pipes, rising swiftly from his seat. Annie and Drew scrambled after him. "Bitte!" called Mr. Pipes, smiling and waving. The children followed Mr. Pipes across the gangway. Then they turned and watched as the deckhand cast off lines. With a roaring of engines, the boat finally pulled away from the dock, their spy still on board. Drew turned with a big grin and waved at the boat. "Come along, Drew," said Mr. Pipes. "Surely we've given him the slip this time, but we mustn't gloat." He hailed a taxi waiting at the pier, and they sped away from the river, Annie straining to watch the disappearing boat out of the back window. The moment the taxi disappeared from sight, the young man on the boat sprang into action. Peeling off his leather jacket and yanking off his boots, he then moved casually to the port quarter of the boat, the side closest to the pier. He glanced back at the passengers, stepped nimbly over the rail, and slipped silently into the water. To avoid detection from the boat, he swam under water. A minute and a half later he gasped to the surface, paused for only a second, and with strong, steady strokes made his way to shore. Moments later he stood barefoot and dripping in a phone booth. "I'll not beat around the bush. I've lost them." Yes, I know all that." "No, of course not. I wouldn't dream of it." "Well, yes, as a matter of fact, I believe my cover is blown. Now, you just wait a minute. I'll simply not dress like a German peasant woman. Ridiculous idea. Leave my next disguise to me. Yes, this clearly is not on their original itinerary. I'll intercept them at stop F." He slammed down the receiver and, with eyes narrowed, looked both ways and walked into a clothing shop across the street. Meanwhile, several miles away on the outskirts of a nearby village, Mr. Pipes paid the taxi driver, and the children followed him down a scalloped stone walk past a carved sign that read Fritz Kirchen Algoba. The pathway wound through neatly trimmed red and yellow roses and took them to the front steps of a large brick house crisscrossed with white timbers that reminded Annie of hopscotch patterns. Above the sturdy double doors in the center of the house rose a high gable, the two lower wings of the house forming shoulder-like additions to the imposing center. Mr. Pipes pushed a button next to the door, and a sustained, reedy bass pipe sounded from inside. "He's rigged a pipe organ doorbell," said Drew. "That's a nice touch." Once inside, Mr. Pipes introduced himself and the children to a young man sweeping a pile of curly wood shavings and asked to speak with Herr Fritz. A moment later, the room filled with the bustling presence of Herr Fritz, a broad smile on his fleshy face. "Guten Tag, mein Herr," said Herr Fritz, shaking Mr. Pipes's hand warmly. The two men spoke in German for several minutes before the big German turned to Annie and Drew. "This is a most welcome distraction. Your friend has said very nice things about my organs and asked me if I would mind showing you my little workshop. Mind? I say to him, I would be delighted. You must come with me." They followed Herr Fritz to the pipe rooms down a narrow hallway. At least it seemed narrow as Herr Fritz lumbered ahead, gesturing and explaining, sometimes in English, sometimes in German. Swish, swish, went a block plane as a worker shaped a long wooden pipe lying on sawhorses. Paper-thin shavings, curling like ringlets, fell to the floor. "This pipe will make a lovely logis," said Herr Fritz, bending and eyeing down the long pipe. The woodworker stood aside nervously for the impromptu inspection. Suddenly, Herr Fritz hefted the enormous pipe, His cheeks puffed out, and with a red face he blew a long blast into the pipe. A low, clear tone ended in a gasp as Herr Fritz, helped by the workmen, lowering the pipe back in place. Ja, ja, I believe you may fit this one into the wind chamber. Next, Herr Fritz led them into a room lined with dull metal pipes, each one slightly bigger than the last, and some taller than Mr. Pipes. He showed them trays of tiny little pipes, the smallest no bigger than a pencil. Drew watched his fascination as one worker cut thin sheets of lead and tin alloy, another hammered them with a wooden mallet over pipe forms, and another cautiously soldered them into their completed pipe shape. In a much quieter adjoining room, a worker with a magnifying glass attached to his glasses and a sharp cutting tool in hand bent over a small pipe. Mr. Pipes spoke softly to the children. This is, perhaps, one of the most critical parts of the entire process. True indeed, added Herr Fritz. Hans, my voicer, is an artist. Why is he cutting the pipe all up? Asked Drew, moving closer. He is cutting the mouth of the pipe, and then he will shave a little here and shape a little there. His work finally determines a quality and character of the entire organ and of my reputation as an organ builder. Good man, Hans. Hans gave him a shy smile. Then in halting English he said, Herr Fritz, teached me all. Next, Hans put the foot of the pipe to his lips and blew. A clear, reedy tone came from the little pipe. Ah, Hans's pipes almost always speak the first time. Hans, still blowing, cocked his head, listening critically. He picked up a tiny hammer, and tapping around the mouth of the pipe, shaped the voice of the pipe. He will do that with every pipe in this organ, said Herr Fritz. Drew eyed Hans with interest as he blew in the pipe. I never realized you could blow in a pipe with just your own breath, he said, eyeballing up the pipe at Hans. How many pipes in this organ? He asked, counting the pipes lined up on Hans's workbench. This organ will have only 2,600, said Herr Fritz. Not the very biggest, and each one will make by hand, every step by hand. Come with me. I will show you how we make the lead for the pipes. Annie scrunched up her nose and covered her ears in the next room. Steam drifted from a sinister-looking gray cauldron where a worker, shrouded in what Drew thought looked like a spacesuit, adjusted the temperature. Several hundreds of degrees, shouted Herr Fritz. Very hot. Next, the workers poured out the molten lead and tin onto a long table, while another man pulled a wooden squeegee-like device over it, spreading the lead evenly. No, no, Drew, said Mr. Pipes. Watch from right here, my boy. Any closer and you might very well end up a permanent part of this organ. Drew obeyed. What's all the banging? Asked Annie, now covering Lady Kitty's ears. Trip hammer, said Herr Fritz. We use it to work hard in the lead. It does make an awful racket. We will go. Finally, Herr Fritz led them into a room with a soaring ceiling, and rising to the rafters, its grandeur already evident, stood a partly completed organ. What a lot of work goes into one of these, said Drew, looking at the row upon row of wooden and lead pipes already in place. Look at all these keys and levers and pedals. It's a work of art, Mr. Fritz, said Annie quietly. Herr Fritz beamed. Mr. Pipes took off his glasses, blew the dust off, wiped them on his sleeve, eyed through them, and placed them back on his nose. He nodded and smiled appreciatively up at the instrument. Magnificent. You would like to play it, I think, said Herr Fritz. Surely it is not ready, though, said Mr. Pipes. Part of it's ready to play, said Herr Fritz. We play each pipe on the little voicing organ. Then we install the pipes here and try them out. The entire organ is built here in the workshop, played sometimes by the organist, who will play it when it is finished. I would never allow an imperfect organ to leave my shop, and then we take it all apart, move it to the church, and put it all back together again. He paused for breath. It would be an honor if you would play it for me. Please, play whatever you like. He cleared away a chisel and some wood shavings from the bench, and Mr. Pipes, stroking his chin in thought, sat down in front of the keyboard. Well, then, this being Germany, said Mr. Pipes, digging in his knapsack and handing his hymnal to Annie and Drew, I'll play Paul Gerhardt. The children and I have talked recently about your grand hymn writers, of which he is among the very best. Several workers gathered around as Mr. Pipes played Gerhardt's All My Heart This Night Rejoices. Try these pipes, said Herr Fritz, hovering over Mr. Pipes and pulling stops on the console. Mr. Pipes added more bass and the music swelled. Soon the workshop filled with singing. Warum sollte ich mich denn grammen? Annie and Drew flipped pages until they found Gerhardt's hymn. Not sure where to put in singing, Annie and Drew read through the words as they listened to Mr. Pipes and Herr Fritz and his little workshop choir. Drew especially liked the words of the third verse. Shall we still dread God's displeasure, who, to save, freely gave his most cherished treasure? Annie smiled as she realized how characteristic short poetic lines were in German hymns. It adds to the simple grandeur. Mr. Pipes taught them that word last summer. Of German hymns, she decided. On the bottom of the page, under Paul Gerhardt's name, she saw a woman's name, Catherine Winkworth. Maybe she helped write it, Annie decided. When the music stopped, Herr Fritz applauded Mr. Pipes's playing. Do play for as long as you like. I insist. But we must return to our work. I will check with you presently, he said. With a sharp clap of his fleshy hands, his workers dispersed, and he was gone. Mr. Pipes and the children found themselves alone with the grand instrument. Is it just me, said Annie at last, or do the lines of German hymns all seem shorter than most English poetry? Quite right, my dear, said Mr. Pipes. German hymns, so often passionate prayers, really reflect these earnest Christians' immediate relationship and constant conversation with the Lord Jesus. Even the structure of their poetic lines shows this. Maybe with all the troubles they suffered through, continued Annie, they had less time to think about longer, eloquent lines. This way it sounds more like they were really crying out to the Lord. Yeah, agreed Drew. If you were busy dodging bullets and running for your life, you'd cry out for help too. But there is considerable eloquence, though of a different kind, in their passionate plea to the Lord, said Mr. Pipes. Those punctuated lines help create a tone of utter dependence on the Lord and faith that he will answer their cry. Drew looked again at the hymnal. His most cherished treasure. Mr. Gerhardt must have met Jesus, God's Son, the treasure, I mean. Yes, said Mr. Pipes. By the late 1600s, German hymns had taken on a more personal, devotional character, and increasingly Jesus, the second person of the Godhead, was the object of that adoration. I wonder, said Annie, a faraway look in her eyes, if it was because Jesus suffered so terribly, German Christians felt that he understood their suffering. It's just a thought. And a very good one, perhaps, my dear, said Mr. Pipes. He turned back to his keyboard. I'm reminded of another lovely hymn, also a passionate adoration of Jesus, though the earth be shaking and every heart be quaking. Remember, these were extremely difficult days. A lawyer, Johann Franck, wrote a hymn in 1655, full of tender resting in the arms of Jesus, and at the same time a defiance of the devil and a determination to find the purest pleasure. Come wind, come weather. In Jesus, follow along while I play the tune, then we will sing it together. A tender melody filled the workshop, with notes descending contemplatively in the first lines, then rising to a resolving crescendo, and finally returning to quiet adoration at the finish. They sang, Jesus, priceless treasure, fount of purest pleasure, truest friend to me. Ah, how long in anguish shall my spirit languish, yearning, Lord, for thee. Thine I am, a spotless lamb. I will suffer naught to hide thee, naught I ask beside thee. In thine arms I rest me. Foes who would molest me cannot reach me here. Though the earth be shaking, every heart be quaking, Jesus calms my fear. Lightnings flash and thunders crash, yet though sin and hell assail me, Jesus will not fail me. Satan, I defy thee. Death, I now decry thee. Fear, I bid thee cease. World, thou shalt not harm me, nor thy threats alarm me, while I sing of peace. God's great power guards every hour. Earth and all its depths adore him. Silent bow before him. Hence with earthly treasure, thou art all my pleasure. Jesus, all my choice. Hence thou empty glory, naught to me thy story, told with tempting voice. Pain or loss, or shame or cross, shall not from my Saviour move me, since he deigns to love me. Hence all fear and sadness, for the Lord of gladness, Jesus enters in. Those who love the Father, though the storms may gather, still have peace within. Yeah, whatever I here must bear, thou art still my purest pleasure, Jesus, priceless treasure. Mr. Pipes's voice quivered slightly on the last line, and Drew cleared his throat and coughed. No one spoke for several moments. I don't think I have ever heard anything more beautiful, said Annie at last. Life must have been very hard in those days, but he sounds like he really did have peace within. I think I'd be scared. Mr. Pipes blinked rapidly before speaking. My dears, Mr. Frank made the very best use of his troubles. Pain or loss or shame or cross, he resolved, as ought we, never to give over to fear or despair. And why? I'll tell you why. Since Jesus, the Lord of gladness, deigns to love us. I think this one might come in handy, said Drew. I think it'd be a good one to memorize. You know, for if trouble ever comes to us. Oh, not if, but when, my boy, said Mr. Pipes sadly. This world is not heaven, filled with sin and sorrows and disappointments as it is. He paused, looking at the children, but not seeing them. Annie studied the old man's usually cheerful face. Was he thinking of his wife who years ago grew sick and died? Annie remembered how pretty Mrs. Pipes looks in the pictures filling the walls of the old man's cottage back in England. Or was he thinking of the children they never had? Annie's mind traveled back to their home in America. She felt an ache inside for her mother and father. All they had was earthly treasure. But then it must not be enough, she mused, because they always seemed to need more. She longed for them to know Jesus. A smile began to reappear on the old man's face, and the sparkle returned to his kind eyes. Whatever we here must bear. Annie and Drew, remember that Jesus is our purest pleasure. He our priceless treasure. Annie and Drew followed Mr. Pipes into Herr Fritz's office a few moments later to thank him and say goodbye. Ah, my friends, if you must go, let me present you with a gift to remember my little organ-building workshop. Drew heard rustling and clanging as Herr Fritz bent down beside his desk. Here we are, he said. I hope you do not mind. These were not quite perfect. For you, Mr. Pipes, a Fritz pipe in C, and for you, my dear, he said to Annie, a Fritz pipe in E, and for the young man, a Fritz pipe in G. Now, with practice, you can play something, maybe a hymn, while you continue your journey. That's it. Blow them all together now. Lady Kitty's tail twitched, and she arched her back as the threesome blew a chord in thirds. This is great, said Drew. It's like we're a human organ. He blew another long blast as they said farewell to Herr Fritz and walked down the cobbled lane, leaving the workshop behind. As they got into the cab, Annie looked cautiously up and down the narrow street. Mr. Pipes saw her and said, You were right all along, my dear. I'm absolutely convinced of it, and I'm most awfully sorry I didn't believe you. I do hope now we have finally given him the slip. I wonder if I ought in my next letter to mention our spy to Dr. Dudley. No, that would never do. We mustn't worry him further. Caution, that's the rule, and we must keep our wits about us. Indeed, we must.